My name is Chris Hemphill. I'm a sales engineer here with Salesforce. I appreciate everybody coming today and look forward to spending the next hour talking to you guys about developing Facebook applications on the Force.com platform. Hopefully that's what everybody's here to learn how to do. So really, I got into developing applications on Facebook about 2.5, 3 years ago when Facebook first launched their platform. And since coming to Salesforce about 2 years ago, I've had the opportunity to start to figure out how to use Force.com, start to work on our toolkit, and start to be able to build those same applications, very similar, but in this context for a business purpose, kind of what we were talking about with the concept of creating that answers community within Facebook on your Facebook page. How do you start to develop applications that matter for business versus, if I were to look at some of the applications I built a few years ago, it was things like concerts, so you could easily find concerts to go to with your friends. It was things like an application called Snowtick that I built on Facebook, where you go find out where my friends are skiing. So in business, it's what are my friends buying? What websites, what brands do my friends care about? And so as we go through the session today, hopefully we'll walk through a few scenarios that you guys will be able to take back to your office, take back to your organizations and say, I know how to use the Facebook toolkit to develop applications on the platform. Go ahead and use the clicker here. So, of course, we have our safe harbor statement, and you guys have all heard about that one before. So with some of our recent announcements and some of the things we've done this year, it's really how do we start to engage with the communities that are out there on the internet? And of course, there's Google, there's Twitter, but there's also Facebook. And Facebook is a much more kind of broad community when we look at kind of what you can build from a social perspective. You can build applications that are, meant for consumers in mind. You can build applications that might even be internal to your organization. Maybe you're leveraging some contacts you have outside of the workplace and people who are not coworkers. You want to go ahead and understand maybe who a key executive is that you're selling to, who they know that you know. We'll talk through a scenario about that in just a few minutes. But really, it's what are the different social clouds? Why do they matter? And Facebook is really an important one that I think has a lot of flexibility and promise to develop on in the future. When we look at social in the enterprise, really Gartner and Forrester and a lot of the analysts are now really looking at this as a key area of focus and a key differentiator as far as technologies. And I think when you look at some of the things we've done with Chatter, it's going to be really exciting how we can actually use and integrate Facebook with that as well going forward. Gartner said it was going to be have the same effect that ERP had in the 1990s. And Forrester actually even said that it's the most important trend in CRM this year. So why do social platforms matter? Facebook and other social platforms, in this context, this slide is focusing on specifically on Facebook. But with the platform, you also get things like feed. You get where your friends are. You get their identity. You get the concept of enabling users to come to your site and not have to go create another user profile yet again. We can just go ahead and click connect and use Facebook's single sign-on or their identity platform to go ahead and use our existing consumer identity. So very relevant for consumer sites. But we also can go ahead and identify who's friends with who. So if we have a coworker who connects with their friends in a Force.com application, we can now see who they're friends with as we use the application. We can maybe use that, again, to close a sale more easily, or maybe that's a part of a recruiting application. We know who already knows that person within the organization. We also have the concept of feed. So again, kind of tying into the concept of what we can do with what we're doing with Chatter. But what's going on out in the social network? What conversations are we generating with the discussions that occur from our applications? So maybe somebody comments on an idea out on our ideas site. How does that information make its way into Facebook, and how do we capture those conversations that go on around that? All things that we'll talk about how you can use the Facebook platform to start to build that type of environment, build that integration and kind of discussion forum for everybody to interact and engage with your company. So one of the things you guys saw as you might have logged into the attendee portal was the concept of using Facebook Connect and building an application right within the attendee portal, which of course is a Salesforce customer portal that we've rolled out. And you might have seen the ability to actually see your friends, check out which sessions they're going to, pull up that session, and actually identify which of your friends are going to which sessions, even pull up other attendees that are going to those sessions. So really using Facebook and the platform to be able to actually identify where should I go. Maybe do a little bit of discovery based on where your friends are already going. So a good example of using it in the context of events. But all something, this is all built on Portal and the toolkit, so it's very easy to go ahead and if this is appropriate, this is the type of use case you guys might think about, rolling this out as well. And we'll talk about how to get there as we go through the demonstration. So what if we turned contacts into a contact genius? What if we were able to pull up contacts and immediately be able to see that a key executive that we have in the system also actually is friends with somebody that we know, another coworker. We can also then maybe take some additional information from that executive's profile, some of the things that we can publicly see about them on Facebook. And we can actually see what their interests are. Are they into golf? Are they into skiing? Things that we can use to better sell to that key executive within the organization. We also might use Facebook to, as I mentioned before, extend Facebook Connect. So as we use Facebook Connect, we might enable people to actually log into our site much easier and participate with our community much easier. Crocs actually did a great job of doing this on their ideas site. So I don't know if anybody has gone out to that site, but with a single click, you can really sign up for the Crocs Ideas community and immediately start to engage with it. So you've really reduced that barrier for adoption for new users of your site, but you've also enabled them to gain a more enriched and enhanced experience as they start to participate in your community. They now know which of their friends are using the site, much like when we saw the events example just a second ago. Who else is going to a particular session. So we can start to give them additional social context within that application. Other examples are, let's build an application within Facebook. Maybe we're in a business where our customers are living within Facebook. That's what they do. That's how we expect them to interact with us. So let's make sure that we're able to build a solid community for them to engage with us and start to post stories on our wall, start to engage with our application that we've put out there. And we've talked about a few examples of this with the Service Cloud over the last year. We've also talked about with Answers being able to roll out a discussion forum where your customers are essentially able to go to your Facebook page and able to immediately interact with your brand. Okay. My computer decided to... Yep. Okay. Sorry about this. My machine is waiting for something. There we go. So really what I want everybody to walk away with today is, where do social applications fit within the enterprise? And I don't expect this to be a full list, but I hope this is maybe a start so some people can start to imagine what we can do with Facebook. I hope over the next year that we really start to grow the different use cases that others think of, ideas that I haven't put forward today. How to deploy the Facebook toolkit, so really how to get up and running. And from a developer's perspective, really get the toolkit installed into your org, and immediately get down into the actual Apex and understand kind of what things are doing, so that you can modify it as needed, or just go ahead and take advantage of it out of the box as we have put it together today. I also want you to be able to understand how to deploy the example applications. So there's going to be 3 example applications that we have out there. There's one today. I'm going to be posting 2 more very shortly. And those example applications are really just meant, okay, how do we get Facebook Connect up and running for an external site that we're running on Sites Technology? How do we go ahead and get an internal Force.com application wired up, and how does that work? How do we start to enable that social context within Force.com? Another example might be, how do we actually spin up a Facebook Canvas application, or an application that actually lives within Facebook? So from there, really the toolkit basics, how to extend the toolkit. And hopefully, a few of you guys decide that you're really interested in this and this is something that you want to potentially participate in the Google Code project that's out there. You want to suggest some other examples that we might put together, some other use cases we haven't thought about, and how we might adopt or change the toolkit going forward as well. I really have to apologize for my system here. Okay, so jumping into the Facebook toolkit. Really starting this out, I think it's important to understand Facebook at the very beginning, and that is, we'll get into the Apex side of that, how to install the package, but the core components to Facebook. This is a new environment for many that are starting to get into this world. How many people here have actually developed a Facebook application before? So we have about 2. So I think the most important thing is really starting to get to know what Facebook offers. You're really starting to work with a whole new platform here, which is great, but it's also a little bit challenging. You got to make sure you understand the parameters, what it is you can and can't do. And Facebook has a lot of resources out there. They have a whole developer community and an entire site where there's a series of discussion boards and forums to really get your questions answered. But the basic core components that they offer to us that we're going to take advantage of is really the underlying API, which consists of the methods that you're going to use to talk to Facebook, and it's a REST-based API, and we've built a wrapper for that, which is essentially the toolkit. It also consists of XFBML, and XFBML and Facebook Connect are really the 2 key pieces that when we talk about a user first landing on your site, this is how we're going to start to establish connectivity. Is this person already logged into Facebook? Are they a Facebook user? We can start to do a little bit of that on the front end, and this is how we're really going to start to communicate with Facebook and what's going to enable us to then communicate on the back end as well. And that really goes for all 3 environments, but really those are the 2 key pieces to understand. And then I think as we get into the toolkit, we'll actually install something into your org as a part of the toolkit, which will enable you to configure some of the kind of static settings that Facebook's going to provide to you, such as your API key, your session, or your application secret, and also some of the other settings that you're going to want to set for each Facebook application that you spin up. We look at the Force.com toolkit that we're going to provide and we're going to install. You'll notice that there's actually a few objects that we'll add. So we'll add a site configuration object, which I just mentioned, enables you to enter that API key and app secret. It's also important to note that you're going to want to tighten up the security around your application secret. That's something that as a developer or as an instance, as an application on Facebook, that you want to make sure that only really you as a developer or administrators have access to. You do want to make it readable, though, so that you can enable guest users to get that value when needed to on the back end, that is. There's also a key component that we're going to install. It's called the Facebook Connect component. And what we do with that is that really helps us to initiate that initial JavaScript and Facebook Connect piece of the communication. And it's going to be something that we'll pay attention to during this demonstration and presentation today. There's also some key classes to highlight, one of which is the FPC Authenticator. That's really where we handle all the authentication. We understand which type of user we're dealing with here. Is it a site user, and are they a guest right now? Is it a customer portal user? And as a customer portal user, do I already have a profile associated to me from a Facebook perspective, or do I need to go ahead and do we need to connect to a Facebook profile that's already there, that user might have? So do we need to let them log in? Do we need to associate to the profile that's already logged in? And so again, a lot of that communication, understanding of what state they're in, is going to occur in the Facebook Connect component there. But on the back end, it's going to go straight to the FPC Authenticator, create the appropriate user record, and then really on the back, kind of behind that, there's the Facebook Session class and the Facebook Method class. And those are really kind of, if you look at the Facebook API on Facebook's documentation, they're really just directly mapping to that, establishing what it is that Force.com is going to do with that information. It's kind of a picture describing what I just walked through, and that is that we really have the client on the browser side over there talking to Force.com. They might make a request for a website, and on that site, on the front end, we might have Facebook Connect, establishing that connectivity, and talking to Facebook's API via the JavaScript API. on the back end, as we call the FBC authenticator and we get into the register user method, we're actually going to now start to talk directly to the Facebook toolkit. And as we do that, again, some of the key pieces to that are the FBC authenticator, the Facebook session, and the Facebook method. So again, 3 types of applications we're going to want to make sure that we understand that we can create. And again, there might be a few extra out there that we learn over time, but I really see these as being the key 3. Force.com site enabled with Facebook Connect. So that is just like the Crocs Ideas site that I referenced earlier. Instead of logging in and creating a new user profile, let's go ahead and click Connect and use our existing identity. Facebook Canvas application lives right within Facebook. A user clicks on that page, knows who we are, creates the user on the back end, and they're immediately right within Facebook. Don't even know that they're on a Force.com site. Or an application that we might extend internally within the walls of our Salesforce instance. Could be something that might integrate with Chatter. Could be something that you might build as maybe part of an HR application. As we create our first Facebook application, you're really going to want to, of course, decide on the type of application we're going to build. And then you're going to want to go ahead and create a new Facebook application. Facebook has a developer application. It's apps.facebook.com/developer. And as you go there, that's an application itself. You'll install it, and it will now give you the ability to go ahead and create a new application. And some of the key pieces you're going to want to focus in on here are things like, and they're probably a little bit hard to see in the back, so we will get to these on slides in a second, but there's an API key on this record. There's an application secret. And there's also some key settings as far as the different parameters that you can set for what's your site's base site name, what's the base domain associated with that. And based on the type of application that we're creating, you might want to set things up a little bit differently, and I've tried to outline some of that in the slides for us. Installing the toolkit. There's a few ways to get that done. One is go to Google Code, pull it down through the IDE using SVN. The other is we recently were able to package it up, and so now there's a package available, and I'm just actually going to go ahead and put that on the Google Code site. So hopefully to save you some of the steps there, make things a little bit easier to get this up and running. As we get into this, we're really going to want to start to configure our sites. We're going to want to make sure that we turn on sites. We're going to want to make sure that we've added a file that comes with the toolkit called the XD receiver to that site, and that's in all cases, no matter which type of application we're creating. We're going to want to configure our remote site settings. So as we configure our remote site settings, that's enabling us to talk to Facebook on the back end, but it's a key step. If we don't do that, you suddenly won't have connectivity to Facebook, and you might wonder what's going on. Again, create that site config record. You're going to want to create a site name, enter in that API key you got from Facebook, also that application secret from them. And even if we're in this scenario, if we're going to be creating new portal users, and in other words, it's a Canvas application, we want to track that identity of that user, we're going to actually create a portal user on the back end. Same thing in the site scenario. We're actually going to create a portal user that's associated to that Facebook user profile. And so we'll want to go ahead and make sure that we have a Facebook user's account that we've created so that those users automatically are put into that account and associated to them. It's not required, though, however, if you were to build an application that might be internal and where that social profile might be actually associated to a user record. So maybe it's a sales user, maybe it's a marketing user, an HR user. You might have a different, you might not have to create the site or the portal there. As we configure the portal user, we're going to want to make sure that they have access to our GFC user record, also that they have access to our GFC user object, and that also they have access to the site configs object. That's going to give them the ability to, on the back end, that user is going to be able to create their record. It's also going to be able to give them the ability to read the information about that site. We're going to want to set up the customer portal and enable self-registration and assign a default customer profile to a custom profile that we've created. So you'll probably want to clone that standard customer profile that comes out of the box, create one with some extra permissions to enable it to access the GFC user and site config record. At that point, we'll want to go back to our site and update our login settings for it. So as we update the login settings for our site, we're going to go ahead and enable that it's enabled for that customer portal. And we're also going to want to give the guest user access on that site, again, access to the site config and the GFC user record. So this is just some basic setup information, but it's also very key to go through, because if you don't do this stuff, your application won't work. You also want to make sure that we expose any of the Visualforce pages that are necessary, so things like your CSS file, if there's a CSS file that you need that's going to kind of organize your site, the login page, if you have a special, particular login page you've put together. You're going to want to make sure that your site can see those front-end pieces that aren't needed as far as that are needed in order to present the initial template correctly. And then at that point, really, we can expose any of the pages we need to that we want our customer portal users to have access to. We can just enable those Visualforce pages for that customer portal profile. And any additional connectivity we want to provide on any page, we can go ahead and use the Facebook Connect component to establish that connectivity on the page to Facebook. After that, you're pretty much ready to go. So that's just some of the basics again. Some of the things you're going to want to make sure that you cover as you go through the setup of a new application. So let's go ahead and jump into how to set one of these up, and we'll go through a live example of actually doing kind of the steps we walked through and getting it up and running. So what we're going to go ahead and do is pull the setup example down from Google Code here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up Eclipse. And as I do that, you'll notice that I've already created a DF09 demo project here. And I'm going to go ahead and go out to SVN. So has anybody used SVN before and touched another project out there? So some people have experience doing this. As we navigate to the force4facebook.googlecode.com/SVN directory here, we can go ahead and pull up the branches. And recently we changed the toolkit a little bit. We initially had one big toolkit that had every use case in it possible. But kind of looking forward a little bit, we said that it might make a little bit more sense to break it down to just the toolkit, the base piece that everybody's going to need no matter what, and then build some examples on top of that so that based on what you're trying to do, you can easily roll those in. So what I've already done is I've installed the package for the toolkit, so I kind of took the shortcut there. And now what we're going to do is actually go ahead and pull in the sample. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that sample. I'm going to go ahead and say checkout. And I'm going to check it out as DF09 demo. As I check that out, do I want to check it out to our default workspace? Yes, and I do want to replace this. I basically just put a thumb in there for me so that we had a place to put it. As I check this out, this is going to pull down all the key pieces of the sample that we put together here. And that sample has, as we go back to our force.com view, you'll notice some key things came with the sample. We can go ahead and take a look at some of those, see some of the key pages. You'll see my home page has come along with it. So this is the key home page we're going to set up for our site here. You'll notice that in that home page, we actually have the Facebook Connect component already put together. And you'll notice that we've given it some actual attributes to go ahead and give it some more information about our application. You'll also notice as we open up the component here that we'll have to go ahead and add that from the toolkit. We can go ahead and, of course, add any metadata components we would like to. And let's go ahead and pull up that Facebook Connect component so you guys can take a look and see what that looks like. As I go ahead and expand on the components that we have in here, you'll notice Facebook Connect is one that's come with the toolkit. We'll click OK and pull this stuff down. So this is the part of the package that we had already installed. So it's already within the org. We just need to point it in so that we can see it within Eclipse. Okay, so as we did that, you'll notice that now we have our Connect component. This came with the toolkit, has some key information such as our site's API key coming in at the top. And again, this is just establishing that client-side connectivity on the browser. And this is going to enable us to actually talk to Facebook via JavaScript. So you'll notice one of the key things we do as we get started here is we actually go ahead and load up Facebook. And one of the key things you'll start to see is calls that are going out to Facebook's JavaScript API, things like FB and init, and passing it our API key and telling it where the XD receiver file is. So a pretty key step in the process. That's, again, establishing that initial connectivity to Facebook. Are we connected? What state are we in? What type of user might we need to create on the back end? So kind of taking a step into the org now that we have that's powering this site, you'll notice that here we are. We have the toolkit installed. We've added the Visualforce pages and the classes that came as part of the example. And you'll notice some other additional tabs that we've added here. We have GFC users. We have site configs. So I mentioned those are two of our tabs that we were going to get as a part of the toolkit. And again, those are really where we're going to start to configure the site for access, configure the key Facebook settings that we'll need to interact with on our site or within our application. As I go ahead and click New here on the site config, you'll notice that it asks for a site name. So in this case, let's call this Dreamforce Demo. We'll call it DF09 Demo. And it wants an API key and a Facebook secret. So this is getting into the piece where we need to go out to Facebook and actually create that application. So as we go out to Facebook and create that application, you'll notice that I've already done a little bit of this for us, but again, apps.facebook.com/developers will get you to the developer application where you can do this. I've given it a name of DF09 Demo, and it's already provided that application, that API key, and that secret for me. So that's some key information we're going to want to take from Facebook. It's going to enable us the credentials to talk to Facebook, and now we're going to want to plug that into our application so that when we're making those calls via JavaScript or via the toolkit, we have this information. As I go ahead and jump back to my other screen here, let's go ahead and paste that information in. And I also mentioned that we need to create that account name for this to roll up to so that when we automatically create users, and in the case of Facebook, you're probably going to want, you potentially could have a quite large application. You're probably going to want to put those all into one big account and kind of maybe take advantage of the high volume portal users that we have. As we go do that, let's go ahead and add a new account real quick. And as we add a new account, we're just going to call it Facebook Users. And we'll save that. Another key piece to this is, as a user, in order for the records to be created automatically here, we're going to want to go ahead and go to Manage Users. We're going to want to make sure the owner of that account actually has a profile or has a role within the organization. So out of the box, this is just a developer org that I spun up this morning. I don't have a role specified yet. Of course, in practice, you will likely already have this done, but it's also a key step as you're getting this up and running with a developer organization. You're just going to want to make sure that you have it all set up correctly and that you actually have a role if you own an account. So that will enable us to automatically create those users. And so we'll actually go back to our site config here, and we'll call this Facebook Users. So again, we've now done a few things where we've entered in that API key, that app secret, and associated the new users that we're going to automatically create as we log in to the new portal user account. So I'll go ahead and click Save. And it's going to say no matches found, so maybe I didn't do that right. If you put 3 O's, that doesn't quite equal the Facebook users. So we've gone ahead and configured our site, and again, this is some information we'll now start to take forward and use to communicate with Facebook. So on the back end here, we're also now going to want to make sure that we've set up those security controls and those remote site settings. So we'll notice that out of the box, we don't have connectivity to Facebook. So let's go ahead and say http://new.facebook.com. And we'll just call this one FB, and we'll say save. No, sorry, I did that backwards. Call it FB, and we will call it give it the appropriate URL, say save and new here, and we'll call this one FBS, meaning FB secure, and we'll say that this one is associated to the secure URL for Facebook. So basically opening it up on the site level so that we can communicate with them. And as a next step, let's go ahead and jump into that site. So we'll go ahead and pull up our sites. As we pull up sites, we haven't created one yet, so let's go ahead and call this one again, kind of similar to the naming convention we already used. We'll call this DF09 Demo. And of course, I've read and agreed to the conditions, and I'm ready to go here, so we'll just say OK. Hopefully nobody took that name from me already. All right. And let's go ahead and say create a new site here. So kind of keep it consistent. And let's go ahead and now that we've done this, we actually want to make sure that we're associating the proper pages to this site. So as some of the things that we got from the example that we pulled down, you'll notice that there's some key pages as a part of this as well. So we have a series of pages in this example that actually are all prefaced by My Facebook. And we have things like My Facebook site login. We have My Facebook CSS. We have our XV receiver file that I mentioned earlier. Again, that's going to be a key file for us in all applications. It's going to establish that cross-domain communication with Facebook. We're also going to have some pages here, things like our protected pages. So those are just some examples of pages that you're not going to want to expose to the site user, but you're going to want to make sure your portal users have access to them. And that means that if I go ahead and try to navigate directly to that site, Sites is going to manage the authentication for me and say, well, we know you don't have access to that page. Let's log you in first and take you to the login process so that you can actually go ahead and create a user. And at that point, on the back end, we'll then create that Facebook user automatically. And based on them logging in after that, being a customer portal user, they'll then have access to the pages that we've only given access to portal users. I'm sorry, for those of you that might not have been able to see everything in the back there, just a quick overview, kind of take a look at what some of that looks like. So as we flip back to the site here, I've actually outlined this in the document here and in the presentation. So if anybody's pulled this information down already, you'll notice during the setup step of the site here that we've enabled these particular pages. So my active site homepage, the site template, and we'll want to enable some additional pages as well. So going back to that site config, let's go ahead and just type in my, and in this case, maybe I haven't pushed them into the instance yet. Go ahead and push all those up there. I thought that happened automatically on us. All right. So hopefully now we can do this and actually see them. There we go. So my Facebook CSS is getting in there, so we should get another one in a second. All right, we'll come back to that piece in just a moment. So we'll set up those login settings here. And it says I'm not allowed. So the reason why that is because we haven't created a customer portal yet. So as we go back and create that customer portal, let's go ahead and enable our users to actually access a portal. We'll go ahead and say save. Again, this is a brand new instance of Salesforce, so we haven't done much of this yet. So go ahead and click cancel. And as we go take a look at that customer portal, we'll want to go ahead and drill down to see what the standard profile is. So in this case, it's Customer Portal Manager. As I mentioned, we're going to want to clone this. And as we clone this, let's call it Facebook Portal Users. As we go ahead and clone that profile, again, we're going to now want to make sure that we have access to those objects. So the GFC user record and the site config. But first, we're going to make sure we open those up and enable those for Portal. So just a few setup steps here as we get going. But once we get this done, we'll be ready to go. So go ahead and go to Custom Objects. We have 2 custom objects here. And in this case, we'll enable both of them for the Customer Portal. So check the Available for Customer Portal box. scroll down and say available for customer portal. So pretty straightforward. Okay. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and go back to that profile and quickly click refresh on it, which will give us those particular permissions to check. I think our internet connection is a little bit slower than I expected right now. Okay, there we go. So now we have GFC users, and as I mentioned, give read, create, edit, and read on site config. So really easy. Now we've opened those up so that the customer portal user can see them. We're going to want to go ahead and go back to the site now. And now that we have a customer portal, we have a customer portal established, we'll go ahead and make sure that we can self-log in on the portal itself. And we'll say self-registration enabled. What's our default user license? We'll go ahead and associate a user role, and in this case, we'll give every Facebook user that end user permission. And we'll go ahead and say Facebook portal user on the portal here. So really easy. We're just kind of setting up the initial portal. And some of you guys might already have this done for the portals you're going to roll out, and the ones you might open up to Facebook. So you might not actually have to walk through these steps here, but all key in order to make sure that we're up and running and that we're able to get this going pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and take a look and jump into sites again and go to DF09 demo. And we'll go ahead and say login settings. So now we can go ahead and click edit. We can allow it for the customer portal here. And go ahead and just click save. So we're pretty much ready to go there. And now it's a matter of editing and adding some of those Visualforce pages we discussed. So let's talk about XD Receiver, My Facebook CSS. And go ahead and click Save. So those are now available to that site. Let's go ahead and click Activate on this site and hit the public access settings, making sure our user has access to, and this is the public site user. So how many people have actually worked with sites? Okay, so as you are familiar with then, on the site side of things, you need to, again, make sure we have the proper amount of access on certain objects so that they can see and read and create as necessary. So we'll go ahead and open up some of the permissions here and go ahead and click Save. And of course, we wouldn't want to expose all of that information to our users. We might want to take some extra security precautions to lock some of that information down, but that's just the basics there. So as we go back to our site, we've now established all the key information we need to pretty much get it going. And we're going to want to go ahead and take our URL here for our secure web address and plug that into our Facebook Connect area within Facebook. And we're going to want to go ahead and say, here's our Connect URL, and our base domain is force.com. And as we specify force.com, we're pretty much ready to go there. So go ahead and click Save. And so now we've told Facebook, if we were logged in, pull up our application and make sure we actually edit that information. Go to Connect. Sorry, we'll do it one more time. Okay, so now we've added the key information to let Facebook know that we're going to be talking to it, kind of what URL we're coming from. So we've done that both on the Salesforce side with the remote site settings. We've done it on the Facebook side within their application setup, which enables us to just establish that connectivity. So really, that's all we needed to go ahead and set up. I think the other key part that I need to make sure we completed was making sure we had those appropriate pages available to us. And so let's go ahead and make sure the active site homepage is not under construction. It is instead. I need to make sure I get those files up there. So pages are not pushing up for some reason or another. Got it. So something about my save of everything didn't exactly work as planned as we were going through here, so sorry about that. So let's push everything up. Okay. All right. So it might have been something about how I checked them out, and I think I might have done that real quick. So I think you might want to export instead of check out. So I do have another sample here that I did last night, just as a backup. So let's go ahead and jump into that one. It's a lot of the same setup steps, though, to get it going. And as we go ahead and get it going, we'll switch over to Xampill at Same setup here. Again, we have that DF09 test application we've put together. We have our setup area, and within setup, under sites, we've already set up our site. And as we go ahead and pull up that site, it's actually going to go ahead and recognize that in this scenario, we've already logged in, we've already authenticated to the site. But if I go ahead and click Try It Now, it's going to go ahead and say what happened. And what actually happened here is you got to the site because you used your Facebook credentials to execute a single sign-on to a customer portal. And so as we go ahead and maybe try this same URL out on a different browser, so we'll go ahead and log in as maybe a different user so we can see how it works. Let's go ahead and pull up Internet Explorer here. And go ahead and say yes. Authorization required. And really what happens as a user as you land on this page now, we've said, hey, we want to go to my protected page, which again, remember that we've only given access to that to the customer portal user. That particular page is protected, so it's redirected us to the login screen, said you need to log in to view that. And with Facebook Connect, instead of using our standard profile, we can go ahead and simply click Connect. And instead of creating that brand new user, let's go ahead and instead say that we are, in this case I'll use one of my other login names, and go ahead and enter in my username and password. And so without doing anything as an end user, difficult other than just saying who I am and so on, I've now gone ahead and authenticated. It's going to go ahead and on the back end create a brand new user record for me within Facebook, and it says what happened. And again, on the back end through the FBC authenticator, we've now called register user, and it's essentially registered me as a user on Facebook called Paul Pierre. So that's really how you get everything in place, and I've put it within the presentation. And that's kind of the basic example. As we go ahead and take a look at this page, really we've added a Facebook component here from their component library that they have on Facebook. But you can also go ahead and communicate with Facebook on the back end and pull the user's friends and use things like get friends from the toolkit. And again, it's all exposed through the Facebook session. And as we go ahead and create our authenticator for each page and create that session, we're going to then be able to have access to any of those methods within Facebook on their API. So you can do that on the back end using the toolkit. We can also leverage the front end using the JavaScript API and take a look at the Connect component for some examples of how that works. So that was kind of the very first example. And as you can see, there's a little bit of setup involved, but it's mostly configuration. It's really not difficult as far as kind of the steps you need to walk through. It's pretty much makes a lot of sense. We really need to have a customer portal user to log into the site automatically. We need to make sure that the sites are ready and able to talk to each other. So both on the Facebook side and on the Salesforce side. But once we've done that, we're really now established and ready to go. And we've really built this so it's configuration driven, so that if we go ahead and pull up our tabs here, we can create additional sites. So we might have multiple sites within our organization, maybe multiple presences within Facebook, and different types of applications. You can really start to extend the platform to go ahead and leverage that. And we're leveraging that common user here. So if we go ahead and take a look at GFC users, this is really where, as a user registers for the application and they log in, we're automatically creating that information on the back end for them. So we're collecting their username, and in this case, that's actually their Facebook user ID. So we're talking to Facebook's API. We're getting to know who this user is. Then we're able to grab their username. We're able to grab their picture and even create a user that's related to that. So if we go ahead and take a look at the actual user record, you'll notice that on the back end, we've now created a user. And you could change the naming convention here. In this scenario, we've just used email, an email address that's a combination of the user's Facebook ID and facebookid.com, just kind of as their standard username. And that's associated to that GFC or social user record that we have. And of course, in this scenario, we've given them that customer user portal profile so that we've locked in anything that portal user has access to, they now have access to. So going forward, you'll see some additional examples. So I was kind of walking through the rest of the slides here. We're going to go ahead, and I'm going to put up an example in the next few weeks, or in the next week, hopefully, of how to put together a Canvas application as well. So that is an application that lives within Facebook. And that is, as soon as a user lands on the page, it automatically associates that user name, that profile, to the current user logged into Facebook, creates the user on the back end, but really gives you that experience, or gives them that experience of seamlessly interacting with your community and seamlessly, interacting with your Facebook presence. So that's kind of the basis of how the Answers application is being built. We've talked about that's going to be launched when Answers comes out, but it's also how you guys can build completely custom applications. Last year at Dreamforce, we actually showed the My Starbucks Ideas application. That we did the exact same thing to put that together. An HR application, any of the maybe exciting marketing type applications that were talked about with Avon, you could build that the very same way. So hopefully, as you guys take a look at how to pull this down, we'll of course put it right there as a Canvas application example. And you'll do some additional settings that I think are important to focus on here. And that is that you'll want to pay attention not only to that connect part of the Facebook application setup, but you'll also want to pay attention to the Canvas piece. And when you pay attention to when you pull up the Canvas side, it'll ask you what's your Canvas page URL. So that's where you get to claim. In this case, I did apps.facebook.com/CocoIdeas. You'll also want to go ahead and give it a callback. And a callback is once you've authenticated, once anything's really taken action on the Facebook side, where am I going? What URL am I addressing? And that is really you're pointing that directly to your site. You're also going to want to specify your bookmark URL. So when somebody clicks the icon in the tray, or they click the icon within Facebook, and a good example of that, if we were to pull up this actual application, you'll notice that let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like as Paul. You'll notice that down at the bottom here, we actually have Coco Ideas. And as you pull up Coco Ideas, that's really the application that you might extend out that just lives right within Facebook. So when Paul clicks on Coco Ideas, the site knows who this is, and automatically pulls him in. You'll notice we have our Force.com UID and our JavaScript UID in sync. So that is the back end, the toolkit knows that this is Paul, and we've created an associated user to him. And also the JavaScript API knows that this is Paul. So both sides of the Facebook toolkit communicating with us. And of course, then it's really just standard application development on Force.com. How do we then create a list view of the ideas that are out there? And that's kind of the example that I've mocked up here, and probably what you'll see as I push this out. So top 10 ideas. Of course, I only have one idea in the developer org here. But we know that this is Paul. He's logged in as a user. Any action he takes, voting or anything of that sort, is immediately associated to his user record and treated really as if everything else that we do within Force.com. So that's that example, and I think definitely pay attention to some of the settings on the Canvas page URL. Also, pay attention to how you configure your site. It's actually exactly the same as what we did in the prior example. The final example I think that we'll also throw out there is the scenario of how do we build a Contact Genius? How do we use this information in line? And a lot of it's really the same setup stuff that we've walked through, except when we're internal to Facebook, or sorry, to Force.com or Salesforce. Most of this information is really in line to the user that's using this application. It's not a new customer profile that we've created. It's instead associated to a current user's profile. So, what's their identity out on Facebook? So you're not going to necessarily need to set up your new portal user account. You're just going to need to make sure that you have your site name, your API key, and your app secret specified. You'll also then want to make sure that as you pull up those user records, maybe we're building things like a Contact Genius. Maybe we are based on the user ID field, which we can go ahead and zoom in on, that we've been able to store on this user record. Let's go ahead and pull in some of that social information of how do we know Mark Zuckerberg? Maybe we don't know Mark, but instead we know that we have many friends that do. Who's the right person to call to contact Mark? So we can easily start to build applications like that. And again, I could see that having a great fit within a sales process. I could see that having a great fit within HR. We want to pull up a candidate's resume. What is their affiliation to other users out there? So very easy to go ahead and start to leverage that social graph and the profiles of your users that are out in the system already. So hopefully what you guys have been able to walk away with, and I apologize for a little bit of a stumble on some of the pages pulling in, but where social applications fit into the enterprise, how to deploy the Facebook toolkit, what the toolkit basics are, how to deploy the example applications, how to pull those down from Google Code, and then desire to participate in the code project. So as we move forward and as you find new uses for the toolkit, maybe you'll develop applications, roll them out to the App Exchange, or maybe you'll provide some feedback as to how we can enhance the toolkit, make it better so that everybody really can benefit from that. And with that, I think it's, go ahead. I've added some resources here for you guys. And next steps, take a look at the slides, the video, the resources on Developer Force. Did you guys make sure to grab a workbook? Also, have you signed up for your first app with the 300 users for free? And maybe you can win an iPod. So some next steps you guys might take after this. And if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to field those now. We have about 8 minutes left. Is this microphone on? Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, there absolutely is, and that's a great point. So let's go ahead and jump back out to Firefox here. And as we do that, you'll pull up the Force for Facebook project within Google, and big bold right here at the top, installing the toolkit. So all the details we walked through, everything that we did within the slides is documented here as well. And again, if there's any feedback on this, something didn't quite work, let us know. We'll update it a little bit from there. But it's meant to be a living, breathing project here that everybody can participate in and pull down the code and resources as necessary. Yeah, absolutely. And this works on a Mac. I use it on my Mac at home, and this is my PC at work, so absolutely. There are some things with Facebook Connect that you'll want to pay attention to, reading their documentation as you start to test across all the browsers. We've tried to build some of that in, but you might catch a few use cases where not everything loads up initially. And again, it's kind of, you have another platform to deal with in this world, so you just got to make sure you learn a little bit about that. They have a great set of resources out on their documentation as well. So. And real quick, just for those on the video side of things, the question was, does it work on a Mac? Sorry, we're recording this. So. And if you could use the microphone, that would be great. Correct. So the question is, and make sure I have it right, is it that you'd like to associate social information to a contact? So you can do that. One of the things that Facebook is a little bit sticky around is what you can store of their contact information and also how you get that. So if I'm a user and I log in and I've said, this is a particular person within Facebook and I've linked up that Facebook profile ID, the example that I showed actually does all that on the fly, and in the background using the toolkit says, okay, I have active Facebook session. Let's go use this user ID to go see what public information we can pull down based on our relationship with that user. That's the preferred method that they like. There's some terms of service things you might want to read up on as far as what you can do, but yes, I mean, the toolkit will let you get there. It just kind of gets into a little bit of a, what does Facebook allow you or want you to walk away with? They want to make sure you also have the freshest information possible. We all update our Facebook profiles all the time, and it's no fun if somebody goes and leverages my Facebook identity to understand a little bit more about me, and then I go change my information, and they call me, and their information's stale. Any other questions? Well, oh, sorry. So yes, in the customer portal example, where we're opening this up and using sites to expose it via ideas or a custom site, or even within the Facebook canvas, if you are generating and creating new customer portal users, you will want to have licenses for those users to accommodate that. We have a lot of licensing models around that are very flexible, though, so I think it's a great option. So if there's no other questions, I really appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully you guys learned something, learned about the platform, and at any point, if anybody needs to contact me, I'm available on the toolkit here. I'm also chempill@salesforce.com. So thank you very much.